Man, good morning. It's good to see you this morning. If you have a Bible, turn with me to Matthew chapter 6. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 6 this morning, finally, after a very long time in chapter 5. And you're going to be amazed how fast we get through chapter 6. It took us 18 messages to do chapter 5, and we're going to get through chapter 6 in about 4, I think, something like 4 messages. So we're going to kind of breeze through this, not because it's not important, but just that's just the way it's going to work out. And so today we're going to be in Matthew 6, and we're going to break it up a little bit. We're going to look at 1 through 6, and then jump down and do 16 through 18. So 1 through 6 and 16 through 18. And then we're going to come back to the Lord's Prayer this summer, and we're going to have a time where we emphasize prayer together as a church in the summertime. And we're going to go and walk through the Lord's Prayer just a little bit at a time, starting in the summer once we've finished up the rest of this series. But before we jump into the message, I want to mention just a couple of things, and I don't want to make a huge deal, but it's hard not to notice what's going on in our world and in our country right now. And it's a little tone deaf not to say anything about it. We try to go on as much as possible just as normal. But sometimes things happen that, again, as Bruce mentioned, remind you that things are outside of your control. And none of this is in our control. None of it at all. Every single bit of this is something that is way outside of our control, and that does shake people up to some extent when you notice things are in someone else's hands and not in your hands. Now, I say that to say this. I don't see any fear in our folks. I just don't see it. You may see it. You may see it on the media. You may see it kind of on the news. You may kind of see it in some circles. You see it in Costco to some extent. In the grocery stores. I hope you stocked up on leaves because you're not getting any toilet paper. So if you don't already have it, go rake. I'm glad I didn't rake my leaves earlier in the fall. But you see it in some circles, but you certainly see disruption. But I don't see any fear. I don't see any panic among any of our people, and that's a good thing. There's no reason for us to be a people of fear. But what I just want to say a couple of things, just a couple of things. And that one of those things is, no, we're not called to be fearful, and we're not called to anxiety. We're going to see that in just a couple of weeks in the Sermon on the Mount. Do not worry. So we're called to that. But at the same time, we're also called to be wise. We're called to be good stewards. And we looked at this last week. We're called to be people who love others. People who love others. And so as we go through this time, and as we look at things that are being disrupted in our lives, and as we think about as leaders at the church, as we think about what we need to do and what steps we need to take, you need to understand the principle that we will operate on is the principle of loving one another and loving our neighbors and loving even our enemies we saw last week. And so as we come through this, and as we come to situations and places where we may be disrupted even more and assess what we need to do, as of right now, our plan is just to do what we need to do as a church. Our plan is to meet together. Our plan is to do the things that we normally do as a church. But if it comes to a place where we need to make some kind of adjustment, where we need to adjust how we do things or how we worship for a short period of time, a temporary time period, if we need to do that, we're going to take those steps. We're going to do those things, but we're not going to be doing them out of fear. So if we make some adjustment, don't let anybody say, well, they're just scared, because it has nothing to do with fear. It has to do with love. It has to do with love. So in that time period, if it will help for us to make some adjustment, and I don't know if it will, but if it would, then we'll make that adjustment when the time comes. We'll change our plans, and we'll be doing it out of love for other people and not for ourselves. But then the other thing, so we have no plans at the moment. People say, what are we going to do? Right now, the plan is to do what we're doing. We're meeting. And if we have to adjust, we'll stream it. We'll do whatever we need to do to make that happen. But then the bigger thing and the deeper thing, when you go through a time like this, when you see this unrest and unsettled sort of feeling that's going on around our country, the other thing to ask is, what does God want to do through this? What is it that God wants to do through this? Because I don't know if you notice the kinds of things that are being disrupted right now, the kinds of plans that are having to change right now. But if you look at our culture and you look at the idolatry in our culture, Isn't it interesting that the very things we've made idols of are the things that are being disrupted to such a great extent? What have we made idols out of in our culture? Sports. People are pitching a fit because there's no March Madness, no ACC tournament, no NBA season, no spring sports in a lot of school districts. It's just up in arms about it. And I understand it's frustrating, but that's an idol to many people in our culture. Education is an idol. What do we see in there? Disruption in school. What are those kids going to do? Oh, no. They'll miss learning for a few weeks. And I get it. There's bigger issues. I don't mean to make light of that. But we've made idols out of education. We made idols out of work. Work is being disrupted for a number of people. We made idols out of so many things that are the very things that we're having to take a hold on. And you see people just pitching a fit and going crazy and feeling lost for a time. And it's going to be temporary. Don't know how long it's going to be, but pitching a fit for a time because their idols have been taken away. Their idols have been taken away. But let me ask you this. Do you think that if people won't tear down their own idols, that God may use something like this to tear them down for them? Maybe God is tearing down idols for a temporary season in their life. And as normally happens in a situation like this, normally after the crisis passes, people then go busy and they build their idols right back up, don't they? It's like the idols got knocked down, but the season's over, so I'm going to build them back up again. And it won't be long, and life will go on as before to some degree, maybe. But in the meantime, you say, what is God doing during this season when all the idols are laying down on the ground? What does he want to do through it? That's what I pray for. I pray for that. We prayed for that Wednesday night. Had a prayer meeting on Wednesday night and prayed that God would use this season in our nation and in our world in a powerful way. And so what I want to challenge you to do in the midst of all this is use this time, if your life is disrupted, and it won't be for everybody. Some people have to keep on going about their work and do the things that they have to do. But if your life gets disrupted and if things have to change for that season, then use this time in your own life personally to get down on your knees and worship the real God. If the idols are in shambles, then get on your knees, worship the real God during this time, and ask him during this season, not just to heal sick people, and we need to do that, but ask him to heal the sickness that plagues our land. And the sickness that plagues our land is not the sickness of COVID-19, even though that is real, or the flu, or any other sick disease that we might face. It's the disease and the sickness and the plague of sin. Ask God to do a work in that. And why don't you start? That's what we prayed for Wednesday night. Why don't you start with your own heart? Ask God to do something in your own heart to revive you and lead you to turn your eyes and your focus back to him. So we're going to watch it play out. We're going to make as wise a decision as we know how to make, and you get criticized no matter what decision you make by somebody. But we're going to do what we think is the best thing, and we'll do it together. And we'll ask God to use this time, not just in our lives, but maybe other people will be sensitive during this season to the gospel. And maybe you're the person that's there to share it with them. So look for those seasons. Look for those opportunities that God brings in front of you. Sound good? It's going to be a season. Who knows how long it's going to be? And in us, we don't know. God's the only one that knows that. And so we'll continue to put our trust in the only one who can see the end from the beginning. So this week, we're in a new section on the Sermon on the Mount. We finished up deep righteousness. That doesn't mean we're done with deep righteousness. Deep righteousness goes all throughout this entire sermon here, but we finished that specific section out last Sunday, and we talked a lot about the fact that God cares about your heart before he cares about your actions. Does that mean that God doesn't care about your actions? No, it doesn't mean that, but what it means is he cares that your actions match what's in your heart. He wants what's inside to be a reflection, or what's outside to be a reflection of what's inside. He wants your outside to be a reflection of who you really are. And that's the key question that we're going to be looking at today. Is what you do really a reflection of who you are? Is what you do really a reflection of who you are? Are you authentic? You can ask it like that. Are you authentic? Does what's on the outside match what's on the inside? Listen, what do you call someone whose outside doesn't match their inside? What do you call that person? A hypocrite. A hypocrite is someone whose outside doesn't match their inside. Now, the word hypocrite comes, you probably know this, some of you have heard this before, but it comes from a Greek word that means an actor. A hypocrite is an actor. It's a stage actor. It's somebody who pretends to be someone that they're not. They're just playing a role. And the word hypocrite shows up 3 different times in this passage in 3 different related sections here. In verse 2, there in chapter 6, Jesus says, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you as the hypocrites do. And then down in verse 5, he says, when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. And then all the way down in verse 16, Jesus says, when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites. So Jesus says, don't give as the hypocrites do. Don't pray like the hypocrites do. And don't fast like the hypocrites do. This section, tie it all together, is about religious hypocrisy. That's what this section is about, religious hypocrisy. Now, most people think that religious hypocrisy means Christians who sin and do bad things. People that say they're Christians, but they still sin. And I've said this before in here. A hypocrite is not a Christian who continues to struggle with sin. How many of you this morning no longer struggle with sin? Is that you? Would you raise your hand? Would you? Because we want to recognize you this morning. Nobody raised their hand. Christians still struggle with sin. It's not hypocritical for a Christian to struggle with sin. It would be hypocritical for a Christian to claim that they do not struggle with sin. So I'm so glad you didn't raise your hand, because that's the real hypocrite, is the Christian that claims that they don't struggle with sin. So what kind of hypocrisy then is Jesus talking about in this passage this morning? What's the hypocrisy that Jesus is talking about? Well, let's look and see. Starting in verse 1, Jesus, he begins, he says, beware. I'm just going to stop right there for a second. Aren't you glad that God warns you when the bridge is out up ahead? Aren't you glad for that? Aren't you glad when God warns you that there's imminent danger up ahead for you? That's what Jesus is doing right here. He says, beware. Beware, be careful. There's a danger for you, Christian. There's a danger for me. What's the danger? Verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Look at that. What's the hypocrisy right here? It's not Christians doing bad things. That's not the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is not Christians doing the wrong things. He says, beware of practicing your righteousness. Beware of practicing your righteousness. And then he goes on and he gives 3 specific examples of what he means in giving to the needy, in praying, and in fasting. Are those bad things? Is it bad to give to the needy? Is it bad to pray? Is it bad to fast? Absolutely not. Those are absolutely good things. Those are things you ought to do. There are things you ought to practice. Jesus expects that you would give to the needy. He expects that you would pray. He expects that you would fast. 3 times here, Jesus says, not if you give, if you pray, if you fast, but he says what? When you do these things, not if. So the hypocrisy right here is not Christians doing the wrong things. It's Christians who do the right things for the wrong reasons. That's the hypocrisy. Christians that do the right things for the wrong reason. And that is what Jesus is warning against here in this text. And the hypocrites right here, obviously, as they are throughout the Sermon on the Mount and the Gospels in general, the hypocrites here, those are the religious leaders. It's the Pharisees and it's the scribes. But this warning is not for them. That's not who Jesus is talking to specifically here in this sermon, is he? No, he's talking to disciples. He's talking to people who have been trying to follow him. And so the warning is not for the hypocrites. The warning is for the disciples. It's for you and it's for me. It's for us. Because the danger Jesus is warning against is that his disciples would become the hypocrites. Are there any hypocrites in the church? Sure. By this definition, there are hypocrites in the church. That's the danger. There's a danger that you and I would do the right things for the wrong reason. We do the right things for the wrong reasons. And so we need to pay attention to our lives this morning. We need to look at our lives this morning. We need to look at our reasoning this morning. And we need to listen to what Jesus said. Listen to the warning, the beware that Jesus gives in this text. So if you have your Bibles, let's go ahead and look at the text. Matthew 6, starting in verse 1, Jesus says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they've received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Jump down to verse 16. "And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." So the first thing we're going to see, I'm phrasing all of these as be careful. Be careful. So each one of these 3 points starts with be careful. Be careful, first of all, about performing for the wrong audience. Be careful about performing for the wrong audience. In verse 1, Jesus gives us the general principle here, and he follows that up by these 3 specific examples that illustrate that general principle. And that's why I'm not breaking this up into 3 specific messages about prayer, about giving, about fasting. I'm not breaking it up like that because the point is that general principle that you see there in verse 1. It's all about not being a hypocrite. It's not really about prayer, fasting, and giving. It's about not being a hypocrite. And the general principle Jesus states here starts in verse 1. He says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people." And then listen very carefully to what he says next. "In order to be seen by them." Be careful about practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. Now, what does that look like? What does he mean by that? That's where he goes on. He gives the examples. I'll start with verse 5. He says in verse 5, "When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners." Why? "That they may be seen by others." That they may be seen by others. Then jump down to verse 16 again. He says, "When you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others." Seen by others. That word that he keeps using there for see or seen comes from the same root word that we get the word theater from. I just learned that this week. I didn't even know that till this week. That word see or seen comes from the same root of theater. And the idea here is that your life is like a movie that people are watching. Actually, it's more like it's a stage play that people were watching. They didn't have movies back then, so it wasn't about a movie. But for us, it makes more sense to say that your life is like a movie or a television show or a Netflix original that other people are watching. And the question that you need to ask yourself is, who is the intended audience for your movie? Who's the intended audience for your movie, the movie of your life? Who are you hoping will watch your movie? Who do you hope watches your movie? Who are you acting for? Who do you want to see you doing good works? If your life is a theater, if your life is a movie, then who do you hope will see the good things that you do? Jesus says here, the hypocrites live to be seen by other people. They live to be seen by other people. That's the audience. Now, how does he know that? Number one, he's Jesus and he's God. So he knows everything. But number two, he does it for the same reason that we can figure out who's doing it for the wrong reasons. And that is that they do their good things very loudly. Do you know anybody who does their good works very loudly? That's the thing. He says it in three different times here. He starts out talking about the fasters, or the givers, the ones that give their alms to the needy, give to help the needy people. And it says they sound a trumpet to announce that they're giving. Does that mean that they were blowing a literal trumpet as they're, walking down the aisle and dropping their change in and stuff? No, I don't think you take that literally. I think the best way to interpret that is that the offering plate really wasn't a plate. It was kind of a trumpet-shaped device that was wider at the top and it narrowed as it went down. It kind of looked like a trumpet. It was made out of some sort of metal, I don't know, gold or whatever it was. And that it would make a bunch of clanging sounds when you threw your money in there, right? That's the best way I can think of. And so what they were doing is making sure that everybody could hear when they gave. I don't know how they do that. I don't know if they threw it in really hard. I don't know if they dropped them in one at a time, like ting, ting, ting. And they're like, just drop it all in there at one time. I don't know how they did it. But the point is they gave loudly. They gave loudly. They're the people that, put the big check they write face up in the offering plate. If you do that just by accident, no big deal. It's not the legalistic thing, but they're the ones who intentionally lay it face up. I want you to see this one. So that's the givers. What did the prayers do? The prayers would stand up, street corner in the synagogue. Boy, they prayed the loudest prayers and the fanciest prayers. They'd be the ones using words that they didn't even understand in their prayers because they heard somebody else do it, and it sounds like the right thing to pray, right? Be people throwing in beseechest thou and things like that. What does that mean? I don't know. I don't know what that means, but it sounds good. I want to make sure you hear my prayers. I want to make sure you hear my prayers. So the prayers, they stand up, they pray loud, use the best language they could so everybody could notice what an incredible prayer that person was. So the givers, they give loudly. The prayers, they pray loudly. And then the fasters, what did the fasters do? They would fast loudly. They want everybody to know their stomach's growling. Now, I get hungry every week, but it's not because I'm fasting. I'm hungry in here every Sunday. I'm ready to go eat by the time church is over. You already know that about me. I'm hungry right now. You already know that about me. But it's not for a spiritual reason. I just get hungry. The fasters, they're fasting, and they want everybody to know they're fasting. And so it says they come in and they disfigure their faces. They fast loudly. It's crying like, what's the matter with you today? Oh, just been fasting all weekend. Just hungry because I'm fasting, about to pass out because I'm so spiritual. What Jesus is saying is they're a bunch of religious show-offs. That's what they are, a bunch of religious show-offs. You ever had a kid call out to you to watch them do their bicycle tricks? It's like, hey, Dad, look at me, no hands, no hands. Look at me, I can do a wheelie. Look at me, watch what I'm doing. And that's what they're doing here. That's what these religious leaders would do. It's like, hey, look at me, I'm praying. Can you hear me? Look at me, I'm fasting. Can you see it on my face? Look at me, I'm giving. Did you hear the trumpet sound as I dropped the change into the jar? Religious show-offs. Now, the point in all of these is not that they do these things in public. That is not Jesus' main point. We don't take what Jesus said as the application is not we can no longer pray together. The application is not we can no longer give together. The application is not we can no longer call for a fast together as a church. That's not the application. Otherwise, we couldn't do any of those things. The point is, they're doing it for the wrong audience. Who are they doing it for? They're living for an audience of other people, and Jesus is saying you need to be living for an audience of one. Not other people, but an audience of one. Let God be the only audience that matters. And if no one sees you prayer, your public prayer and how good they are, and if no one sees your face as you fast, and if no one sees the offering that you give, that's okay, because what does Jesus say? God sees it. Even if no one else does, God sees it. Verse 4 says about your giving, your Father who sees in secret. Verse 6 says about your secret prayers, your Father who sees in secret. And then verse 18 says about fasting, your Father who sees in secret. Your Father in heaven sees all the good things that you do. He sees you practice your righteousness, and He's the only one who matters. Look at your heart. Does it eat you up when someone can't see the good things that you're doing? Does that eat you up? Ever think, boy, that was a waste. Nobody saw me do that. Prayed this good prayer. Hardly anybody was there. I gave this big check and nobody even said anything. If so, you're doing it for the wrong audience. Hypocrites, Jesus said, perform for the wrong audience. Number 2, be careful about performing with the wrong motive. Be careful about performing with the wrong motive. Now, the first point answers this who question, which is, who do I want to see me do the good things that I do? And this second point answers the why question. Why do I want them to see me? Why do I want them to see me? For the hypocrite, the answer is not just that you want them to see what you do. The answer is you really, really want their approval and praise. You want them to be clapping for you. You want them to be cheering for you. That's what verse 2 says. Why do they sound the trumpet when they give? Verse 2 says they sound the trumpet when they give, that they may be what? Praised by others. Praised by others. Do you know anyone that lives for the approval and praise of other people? Gotta have it. Here's the thing. I think you probably already know this, but here's the thing about living for other people's approval. Other people's approval is fickle, isn't it? And it's fickle. And we never remember this when people are cheering for us and clapping for us. We always think that their clapping and their cheering is just going to keep going on and on and on forever. We think they're never going to stop. But how many of you understand that the same crowds that will applaud you today will tear you down tomorrow? Is that not right? You know, if there's one thing people like better than building somebody up, it's tearing them down after they've built them up. We love to build people up so that we can tear them down. That's what they did with Jesus, isn't it? And that would happen with Jesus. Think about Palm Sunday. We'll look at this in just a couple of weeks. On Palm Sunday, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. The crowd's going crazy. They're laying the palm branches down. They're shouting. They're cheering. They're praising. They're saying, Hosanna. But 1 week later, what are they doing? Just 1 week later, what are they doing? Crucify him. And all that clapping turning into cursing. 1 week later. That's how fickle other people's approval is. And so much of why we do what we do is based on other people's approval and praise. It's motivated by the desire to receive that approval and that praise for others. People live for that. They eat it up. They can't do without it. They're constantly just going around blowing their trumpet, hoping that people are going to compliment them and feed them with this applause. That's social media, but we pick on social media. It's not just social media. It's not just likes on Facebook and follows and shares and all that. It's person-to-person, compliments. We eat that stuff up, and it feeds into this addictive cycle in our lives. And like everything else that's addictive, pretty soon you need more and more of it just to feel the same. And it's not too long before what they said last week's not enough. Now you got to hear them say it this week. And what they said yesterday's not enough, you got to hear it today as well. And then when you don't get it, what happens? If you live for other people's approval, then when you don't get other people's approval, what does that do to your emotions? You get depressed, you get sad, you get upset, you get mad. Like, why didn't they like my post today? They liked it last week. Did what I said. Why didn't they like my sermon today? They liked it last week. Nobody said a word this week. Nobody told me good job this week. Was what I said not good enough? So you live off of it. You feed off of it. And you need more and more of it. And when you don't get it, it rocks your world. Tears you up. You know what? It's just this unfulfilling emptiness to living for other people's approval. And do you know why it'll leave you so empty? Here's why it'll leave you so empty. It leaves you empty because that's not how God made you. That's not how God made you. It goes against what you were made for, because here's the truth. The truth is, when you live for the approval of other people, what you're really living for is your own glory. That's what you're living for. If what you need so desperately is the approval of other people, then you are living for your own glory. And do you know why God made you? Not for your glory, but for His glory. God made you to glorify and praise and honor Him. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31 says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God." Whatever you do, do it for Him. So the real question that you need to ask this morning concerning your motivations is, who should get the glory for the good in your life? God or you? That's what you need to ask. Who ought to get the glory for the good things in my life? God or me? And how you answer that will determine whether or not the good you do is really righteous or whether it just looks like it. You hear that? How you answer that question, who should get the glory, God or myself? How you answer that question will determine whether the good things that you do are actual righteousness or whether they're hypocritical, whether they just appear to be. So Jesus said a hypocrite performs for the wrong audience, a hypocrite performs with the wrong motivations, and then number 3, a hypocrite performs for the wrong reward. Be careful about performing for the wrong reward. Reward is all throughout this passage. It shows up a number of different times all throughout the passage. And the difference then is between the reward a hypocrite receives and the reward that a Christian receives, the reward a righteous person receives. And the difference between those two things, Jesus said, it's a matter of timing and it's a matter of degree. It's a matter of timing and it's a matter of degree. Basically what he's saying is you're trading a better reward later for a worse reward today. That's what he said. You're trading a better reward later for a worse reward today. 3 times, verse 2, verse 5, verse 16, he says, when they clap for you, you've received your reward. When they applaud you, you've received your reward. When they see you, when they praise you, you have received your reward. That word received means to be paid in full and given a receipt. It's like your account is all clear. It's all settled. He's basically saying you've gotten all you're going to get. When they see you, when they praise you, that's the only reward that you're going to get, period. And we work so hard, again, to be praised by others. We work so hard to achieve the approval of other people. And we've already seen it's fickle, it's temporary, it won't last. But man, it's immediate, isn't it? It feels good in that moment. In that moment, it feels like you're just living off of that. But he said, it's all you're going to get. That moment, that's it. That's what you get. Verse 1 says, when you work for the approval of others, you're forfeiting your reward from your Father later. That's a powerful statement that Jesus just said. When you work for the wrong audience, when you work with the wrong motivation, you are forfeiting the reward from your Father later. And I think that wording of that word Father there, I really think that's intentional by Jesus. He calls God Father and not just God. And I think he does it for a reason, because he's going to go on in chapter 7, and we'll get to it, to teach us about how God the Father knows how to give good gifts to his children. He knows how to give us good things. The Father knows how to give us good things. And so let me ask you this. What do you think would be a better reward? The fickle, temporary, unfulfilling, empty reward of the applause of other people, or the good reward from your Father in heaven? Which is better? It's always going to be the reward of our Father. But Jesus said, and this makes it hard, he said, you have to wait for the Father's reward. You got to wait for it. Anybody have a problem with delaying gratification? He said you have to delay your temporary gratification in order to get a better reward one day. A better reward in the future. Notice the difference in tense, he says, between having received their reward and the future tense that the Father will reward you. So can you delay your desire for a worse reward now? For a better reward then? Can you do that? Or would you trade the better reward later for the worst one today? That's what you have to ask. Can you wait for the better reward, or will you trade that reward for a worse one today? He's speaking kind of generically here. What's the reward? What am I waiting on? What's going to be better? I need to know that first. No, you don't. So I think that's the wrong question to ask. We could talk about it, but Jesus doesn't really tell right here what the reward is. We can talk. Is it heaven? Is it some reward within heaven? I don't know. That's the wrong question to me. The question is not what reward I'm going to get. Listen to this. The question is, who do I trust? It's not what reward I'm going to get. It's who do I trust? If I trust the Father, I will wait on the reward from him, whatever it is, because I can know it's going to be better. Do you trust the Father? That's the question. If the Father's good, if the Father gives good things, then do I trust in the Father's goodness? Whatever the reward is, it'll be worth the wait. It'll be worth the wait. As you look at this, so how do I apply this? What do I do with this? And we don't have time. You could talk about that if you go to a small group. You can talk about how to apply that specifically to your life. I think about it. I think the general sort of tone, the overall application that I see in the text is, if you struggle with this, because I think a Christian, again, can struggle with this. If you struggle with this, I think the answer is not necessarily to isolate yourself from people, but I think the answer is spend more time in the secret place. Isn't that what Jesus says to keep doing? It doesn't say never go around people. Did Jesus practice that? No, he was around people all the time, but do you know where Jesus also went? He went to the secret place. He withdrew. He got away. He got by himself to commune with the Father. So if this is your struggle, I wonder if maybe you need to spend more time in the secret place. Withdraw, get along with God, become so conscious of your relationship and of the presence of God in your life that it makes the approval of others seem like a punishment to you in comparison to the reward you receive from the Father. And part of the reward is just, I get the Father. I get to be with Him. What's the real reward in prayer? I get the Father. Pray for things. I prayed Vicky would be healed physically in this life. And God didn't answer that prayer. He healed her in a different way. But every prayer I sent up was not wasted. None of it was wasted. And none of your prayers are wasted. None of your giving is wasted, even when no one sees you. No hunger that you cultivate by fasting or for whatever it might be. No hunger that you cultivate in that time is wasted, even if nobody can see it or know about it. Because what it's doing is it's cultivating in you a hunger that can only be satisfied by your Father in heaven. So go to the secret place.